it takes the magic out of it, and there's certain faculties we have which you start using again when you start using, your head, your hand, and your heart.
I know which artist painted what by the hand. You can see the way the brush has been used.
It's kind of an ironic thing that happens by not actually trying to move too fast, by trying to keep things fairly stationary. It suddenly looks different.
Hello, once again, welcome to Evil O. This is Wazo X Wazo from Udaipur. Today I am extremely fortunate to be sitting with two people who are really special, really talented, and are really shooting up in the art world, I think. Shooting up in the sense they're going up. Jethro Buck and Elisabeth Deane. Do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hello.
Thanks
hello
for having us.
London.
Yeah, welcome to our little mini studio in lockdown.
Oh, you're not in Cambridge or Oxford anymore. Now you're in London.
Yeah, we moved back to London. We're in a place called Brockley. It's super nice. I mean, it's weird circumstances. We moved back just before lockdown, so
we haven't seen much of it in a way, apart from the parks and the natural.
Down in Britain now, like Udaipur just released us last week Saturday. Because I've been in a cage for a long time now. It seems like 3 months, but I guess it's only 2.5. But
wow, yeah. I mean, we were never fully in cage. We could always go out to exercise every day. So
it's slowly easing.
People going back to
they
work.
weren't letting us out at all. We were just like trapped.
Oh.
Yeah, that must be difficult.
So today we're talking about tradition and relevancy. I've tentatively named this, though I'm sure we can stray far afield in our ramblings. But to get this going, I'm just going to throw this out. When I hung out a lot with the printmaking community, one thing printmakers often heard, and probably still hear, people say, who don't really appreciate printmaking, they say, why do you go through all of these troubles to learn etching, lithography? Why are you still doing all these chemical processes on stone? Why don't you just make a drawing or a watercolor and digitally reproduce it? Wouldn't it be so much easier? And basically you get the same thing. More or less, why are you keeping this skill level up of a tradition that is pretty much obsolete? So I guess the same question would apply to people like the two of you and perhaps the people I work with. So you want to start there?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I thought that sometimes, cause we went to the Prince's School and they teach geometry there. So we were doing Islamic geometry, but constructing it from a straight edge to ruler and a compass. And it takes a long time to build up. It's a relatively simple method, but through layering it, you can create really complex patterns. And I thought, sometimes I kept thinking, oh man, like this would be a lot quicker on InDesign or something, but not necessarily, because there's certain things you can't do, but also it takes the magic out of it. And there's certain faculties we have which you start using again when you start using, your head, your hand, and your heart simultaneously, rather than just your head. And when you're on the computer, I never feel good on the computer, really. Like after a long time I've spent typing away, this doesn't feel, whereas after painting or doing geometry, you feel like, oh, my brain's buzzing again and I'm using all these, I'm using my full being.
I think as well, in the kind of world we live in today, where we're always looking at our phones and on social media and sort of have a high level of visual stimulus, by using kind of these old techniques and drawing geometric patterns or the style of traditional Indian painting, it really does force you to slow down and really, really focus. And it creates this kind of state of flow, which this kind of sense of real concentration that I think I don't know, we're losing a little bit. We're finding it harder to read these days, and I think that's why.
Right. I think when you talk to the printmakers, they often say similar, that the process of working on an etching plate, or the process of working on a system, slows them down, especially the etching plate for doing woodcut, that it makes them really think about every move and every line, and so it becomes much more meditative for them, because making a mistake, those mediums aren't so forgiving. You just can't paint over it. So I think that's coming from a similar place. Where you studied with Ajay Sharma, right, in Jaipur for a while?
Yeah, I did. Well, we both have now, but I went to Jaipur back in 2012 and did initial 3 months with Ajay, but then he comes over every summer now with his wife Anita, and we do workshops at the Princess School. And then Liz and I got married, and we went back out to
and spent some time with him again out there, and with Vanita as well. So he's kind of almost inspired a whole resurgence almost in miniature painting, I think, inspiring lots of artists through the Princess School.
Right. And he really taught you, was he the first one who taught you all the preparation of the different pigments and all of this? Or no?
Well, he taught me the step by step, all the processes of miniature painting, but also in terms of pigments, Ajay does use stone colors and dyes, but actually at the Princess School, from a guy called David Cranswick, we had a lesson from him, and he taught us as well about how to make our own paints and why we should. And it's the same thing of slowing down. And kind of an analogy I use is like, if you're going to go on you can either fly to your destination, or you can go on a pilgrimage and walk, and you notice everything around you, and you connect to it, and you meet people. And
I suppose his focus,
like knowing your materials,
is more on the different pigments. And the different processes, and that could be oil paint as well. It's not just the kind of gouache and watercolor that you'd use in miniature painting. So he really taught us also sort of spiritual undercurrent to his teachings, David Cranswick. And we sort of think of him a bit like a magician, really, a wizard.
Well, yeah, there is something about the old pigments, because even when I collect vintage miniatures, my advisor often tells me, well, look at the greens. He says that's a big thing, because people just don't do greens like they did 100 years ago or 150 years ago, because it's a very, very special way that the greens were done. And so oftentimes, the copyists just cannot match the greens the same way. I imagine you have similar feelings when you are painting with your colors.
Yeah, and green's notoriously difficult because it's so ubiquitous. It's always quite hard to make it look really beautiful. You want like unusual greens, but yeah, you've got malachite green, that lovely mint green, and then if you mix indigo with puree and white, you can get a nice texture.
And more grassy green, yellower green,
And they're always more difficult to use, but it's worth it in the end, because you kind of get a nice sparkle on it, and it kind of the different textures they all have.
And you actually become really sort of specific, even about within a color. So like malachite, you start to really want to source like the finest, cleanest malachite, because you really get that vibrancy of green, and you
understand there's a variance within.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Attuned within where you can sort of source those types of things for different, you can use them for different, with more impurities can be good for murkier greens, and it varies, I guess.
Right.
We buy gouache as well, though. I mean, we're not purists. I mean, if I want to get an idea done quickly, I sometimes mix some natural pigments with some gouache as well to get a flat color. I find it easier as well. Yeah.
But it's not just the color mixing either. It's the way the hand is trained. And I know some art historians like Seema Bala here is really big on this. She really claims, well, I know which artist painted what by the hand. You can see the way the brush has been used, and I can tell just by looking and know who painted something. And I believe she truly can. I think that's a possibility. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the modern schools so much lay emphasis on things like this anymore, or do they? What do you think about that?
Well, I never officially went to art school. I never, before I went to the Prince's School, I did history of art. So I feel a little bit less qualified to talk about art schools.
Yeah, I went to art school. I went to Falmouth College of Arts. I loved it, but it was very much self-directed. Here's a space. I mean, I had a great tutor, Lisa Wright. She's a brilliant painter herself. So we had really good conversations, and she was really good at kind of motivating me to, you know, find my style and everything. But in terms of actual tacit knowledge of how, how to make paints or any traditional steps, it wasn't really a thing. And so,
well, you hear wonderful stories in Udaipur, like even with Rajesh Soni, who's not a miniaturist himself really, but he's a very good sketch artist. And he said his father, when he was young, would tell him to draw an eye, and you have to keep drawing the eye again and again, and you draw it until you realize that you are no longer looking at the eye, but the eye is looking at you. You know, and I think that's such a wonderful story when you realize that you are no longer looking at the eye, but the eye is looking at you. But those are all kinds of little traditional ways of training that are disappearing. And in Udaipur, I've been really sad because a lot of the artists on multiple levels, but a lot of the artists here, their children have no interest in learning, okay? And even they used to get young students, but young students don't want to come anymore either because they feel the market for these tourist type miniatures that would be sold in the bazaar has so dwindled. Tourists are now buying different things that they don't have the patience or the time to want to sit down and learn and develop any kind of skill level, even basic skill just to work in a bazaar painting, which I find just so tragic. It's the loss of knowledge.
Yeah, and I guess it's the patronage has changed to the tourist market, and but I guess that's in terms of developing it further and doing different stuff with it and changing the market. And I guess that's what we're going into the fine art market to kind of
Yeah, I want to get back to that because actually I had that question when you were in that symposium, and which I think never got fully explored. So maybe we'll get back to that eventually. But you know, when I started working, and I'm not an artist myself, I never went to art school either. I went to photography school. So my drawing abilities, everything is really minimal to say the least. And but you know, when I met our VJ, he was just working for the tourist market, and his specialty was painting birds on note cards. And he painted birds on note cards. And then to watch this, I want to say young man, because he was fairly young at the time still, just blossom and suddenly be able to do all kinds of things every year. He started to amaze me. And now I'm going through the same process with Dalpat. And Dalpat was working in it's a beautiful little karkhana in the old city, very small. And he sits there with his brother Bunty and Sanju, who's one of the people in the neighborhood that works with the three of them. And they were all painting city palace scenes and lake palace scenes for the tourist market. That's what they did. And Dalpat, I'm sorry, I'm telling my own story, but this is the dialogue, right? So Dalpat initially came to us and we asked him to paint the large cloth backdrops we use at the photo studio. That's what he started doing for me. So he was painting backdrops on the roof of his house, which is not at his karkhana, it's in a different place. And then we had this big project called Chaos in the Palace. I don't know what year that was. It was a suite of 18 miniatures. They're actually hanging in one, but they all have the same background. And I thought, Rakesh is going to take all year to do this, you know, if he has to paint each of these palace backgrounds. So I said, Dalpat, can you just paint each of these palace backgrounds the same way? Because I knew you could reproduce like that. That's basically what he did for the tourist market. But I said, I want each palace background to be painted with different colors. Okay, so no two of them looked exactly identical except in shape. And he did a wonderful job. And then he started coming from backdrops into working with the miniatures. but now he too has just bloomed. And from somebody who made what I always thought were kind of clunky lake palaces and city palaces that didn't show exceptional skill, he's now doing some phenomenal work with miniature paintings because he was set free to do this. And the other thing I'm noticing then, both Dalpat's son has suddenly gotten an interest in following his father's lead now, and Dalpat's son, who never showed an interest in art, is suddenly drawing all the time and perfecting his skills. And Shankar's son, Chirag, is suddenly getting very interested, not suddenly, actually, he's been interested in art for a while. So, those two cases, the transition of skill is happening, to the next generation. But by and large, it doesn't happen anymore. And I've talked to them, but, it breaks my heart. I don't know how you.
What other kinds of careers are these young people choosing? Are they, if they're not following the traditional sort of family?
Well, Rakesh's son, is a mathematical whiz, so he thinks he has good opportunities in the sciences, or in IT, whatever. So, people just look about and think, well, there are other opportunities other than sitting and painting day after day.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't blame them. I mean, that's where that's the same with Ajay's Mitesh has gone to Canada now and doing really well with IT and stuff, and they didn't want to do miniature painting either. But I guess that's how, in terms of my story, and my dad actually went to Ladakh years ago, and he saw everyone doing the harvest and living in these amazing houses, and he came back, and he was working on a farm at the time, and he was like, I want to build my own house. I've seen them do this, I'm going to do it here. And his friends said, no, we're in England and that's not going to happen. And he said, well, okay, I'll try and make it happen. So he dug a big hole and looked at old traditional methods of building cob houses and built his own cob house to kind of like, bring something, a very old tradition, which has definitely been forgotten in England, and try and kind of bring it back somehow. Yeah.
Lizzie, when you paint, are you like tied into, it seems like you're very tied into geometries by and large, sort of Arab tile type work, am I correct?
Yeah, no, that I do a lot of work like that, but I also do some sort of more Indian miniature and style inspired paintings as well. Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like my work is sort of going off in two slightly different directions, really, and they're both I'm equally, I guess, dedicated to both. I definitely want my miniature painting to continue, and but I suppose it will be alongside the geometric work, and I find like the geometric work quite kind of it's quite, once you get into the painting, it's quite repetitive as a process, and I find that allows me to think about the miniatures, like the ideas of what I'm going to do next. So I kind of see them as complementary processes.
So when you're in the geometrics, are you using the traditional paint still?
Yes. Yeah.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm making all my own paints, and actually I find that creative process of making the paints, which actually we have quite a lot hanging around.
I thought Jethro was really shy and hiding under the table or something.
No, I'm just looking for like, there's I'm spilling on some carmine there, some lapis here.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I find like creatively, like making the paints, like it gets me into the right frame of mind for like thinking creatively, because it's still part of that slowing down, I guess, and it's very like methodical. And
do you see those paintings as referring, to me they're obviously more Arabic or Islamic, but do they also have a relationship to maybe the mandala in some way?
Yeah, I think so, to a certain extent. Like, I'm definitely interested in this kind of vibrating or pulsing out of a center, which is quite mandala, sort of, yeah, and it's quite mandala-like. but I guess I'm sort of interested in those. I love the colours that you find in India, and the those tantric, some of the tantric paintings, which I guess also have similarities with sort of more mandala
But it
type
started with
expression.
the Persian miniatures, isn't it? Looking at the details in the architecture is where it kind of came from originally. Yeah.
And Jethro, your painting is much more concerned with ecology in many ways, correct? Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, reconnecting to the natural world.
Simplification.
Not really. Just I like to to simplify things sometimes, but yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's celebrating the mystery and wonder of the natural world, and both literally by using natural pigments, but also symbolically and emotionally, and with the imagination, and painting trees, slowing down to tree time, and sitting with trees for a long time, and then painting them.
You have that wonderful figure in what's it called, Wild Ones, I think, the long painting that's in Paul Abraham's collection now. But you have that wonderful figure of a man who planted an island in Bengal and reforested the island. You want to tell that story?
He's a hero who has rewilded. I mean, like I'm into rewilding, and people that have done that. I mean, I went up to Scotland. We were trying to raise money for reforesting Scotland, and even though I was using lots of motifs from India, I was looking at like several people who have done that around the world, and I mean, I don't know. Painting the trees, and then hopefully turning them into trees through raising money for Trees for Life, a charity in Scotland.
Yeah, and you did that one recently, which I thought was rather wonderful, of the trees of the UK all done in miniature style. So we're using miniature style to paint an oak tree and a maple tree. And
I actually looked at medieval manuscripts there, and the art of the book and illumination. And there's similar parallels. Yeah, we went to an exhibition of limnings of Tudor artists, and they had a kind of a desk there of what they were using. They were using the same shells and similar squirrel brushes, obviously different squirrels. And seeing how they've painted oak trees. But then obviously I've learnt my technique from Ajay, so it's kind of thinking, well, what would happen if the Mughals had invaded Europe, and how would they have, how would these things fuse together?
Yeah, it's kind of, because obviously in the miniature painting you have that stylized language, isn't it, in terms of like the mango leaves or the different types of trees. And I suppose what Jethro's done is adapted that for a more British flora and fauna.
Horse chestnut trees and ash trees,
So on a larger level, you're involved in ecology. So am I. That's always been big on my agenda, actually, since I was young. So maybe a more old-fashioned approach. I would call myself, in the old times, we just called ourselves conservationists or preservationists for forest. That's when they were still forest to preserve rather than to rewild. Right. We're more into like preservation and conserve, which there's not so much left to do anymore. But when it comes to painting, do you find that is that really an effective way to make social change? I guess I wonder, because so many artists talk about, they're concerned about affecting social change through their art. Yet I always question this. And it's because I'm the evil Orientalist, I guess, but is there like, well, if you want to make social change, you should maybe be out protesting or writing your politicians or calling them up on the phone, but making an installation in a white cube, I don't think really affects social change so much. How do you feel about those issues?
I think hand in hand. I think definitely protests, and there's people protesting in London now and all around the world.
Right.
And I think that's good. And I mean, I'm kind of tempted to join them. But I also think that art is a part of that as well, and can be a part of it in terms of.
What do you think about your print for Crane Kelman Gallery?
Yeah, I mean, like
that's very much.
Well, that was a direct, like we
change.
raised money for the Environmental Justice Foundation by selling prints, but also but in terms of culture shapes art and art shapes culture, and our thoughts can direct where things go. Maybe I'm a bit of an idealist, utopian, but I mean, there's a lot of art out there, and there's a lot of Netflix dramas which are dystopian, and I kind of feel like there's a feedback loop, and everything that's been made seems to be happening now. It's like all these like
It's horrible.
it's like, oh man, how bad can it get? And then someone makes a drama and it gets even worse. Like, it's gonna happen. I mean,
Well, you know, the other day, just because I don't get many selections of television programs here, and I don't watch that much television, but suddenly there was this program on. It was a Disney children film, and it was called Tomorrowland. Did you ever see Tomorrowland? Well, that was the whole premise of Tomorrowland, is that back in the 60s, people had a vision of the future that could be progressively better and better and better. We didn't have all this dystopian thing. And, you know, I remember when Blade Runner was first released, Ridley Scott's masterpiece. But when Blade Runner came out, it was one of the first really dystopian futures that were depicted. Otherwise, they were all sort of Star Trek, you know, everything was going to be better in the future in some ways, or at least the same, but more advanced. And so anyway, in Tomorrow World, they basically confront this issue that maybe we've created this feedback loop by constantly dwelling upon a dystopian future. We cause people to lose hope. Well, they lose hope, and then when they lose hope, they stop trying.
yeah, I think it's important to have positive visions, because the law of action, you know, that starts with thoughts turn to desires turn into actions, and you know, where you hold your mind will lead to collectively how we act. And so I kind of feel like maybe it's a responsibility, without sounding too I don't know, righteous about it, but like just I've got the time to think about things. You know, I'm in my studio all the time, so I should try and make like that. So I did a vision of well, I want to paint London, but what it could maybe look like if we made it more green, and yeah, kind of dream up some ideas about how things could be, and whether it'll happen or not. But
I think the kind of ideals sort of behind our both of our work really is to create a sort of sense of stillness and contemplation. And so whether it's like focusing on higher ideals, or focusing on the environment and how beautiful it is, and how we should appreciate like our life on this earth more, and perhaps like with the dystopian, like perhaps we sort of need, like when things are quite peaceful, I think people tend to focus on, you know, it's entertainment, isn't it, dystopia? But at the moment it feels like there's so much going wrong in the world, we don't need any more dystopian TV shows, kind of thing.
Well, the world is so messed up right now all around the world, you know. I mean, obviously the United States is ablaze, but there are so many problems. And, you know, talking about the US, but I mean, this is sort of an aside anecdote, but going back to Dalpat's Carcana, I found this very interesting. So he was painting these photo backdrops, and he started painting some backgrounds or some miniatures. At one point, I walked into his little Carcana. It was always fun. I loved to go there. I still love to go there. You know, if it wasn't for COVID, I'd go there sort of every day and sit there and have a chai. We have a beady together and blah, blah, blah. And, but anyway, one day I went and he said, and these were his words, he said, his owner died. And I said, what do you mean your owner died? And he said, because his English isn't that good, but it was the Indian man in Udaipur who commissioned him to paint all of these tourist miniatures that this man would then take and sell to the different shops. And he referred to him as his owner, which really struck me as a weird choice of words. And I don't know if that was translation or not. So I don't know, a couple days went by, and then I came back and I said, well, how about if I pay the rent on your Carcana and all of you guys just start working for me, because right now Rakesh and I really need some help, you know? And I checked this out with Rakesh to make sure it was okay with him. And then his response right away was, okay, you can be my new owner. And I said, being an American, it's like that doesn't really fly for me. It's like, no, we're not going to use that terminology, But I mean, it's rather sad when that's the mindset that many of these craftsmen, at a lower level, that's the mindset they're in. They're working for somebody who's up above. They literally feel sort of like they're enslaved, because they have no other options.
It's like a hierarchy.
Yeah. I'm making it sound more dramatic than it is. I'm sure Dalpat could find other options, and I don't know if that's just the language that's being used or what. But
do you think in Udaipur now, a lot of the miniature painters working for the tourist market, are they kind of coming from a family tradition, or are they sort of decided to follow this path and learn?
Dalpat did not come from a family tradition. He decided to follow the path.
Yeah.
And so did Rakesh, though Rakesh did have a famous artist in his family, Ram Gopal Vijay Varghia. So his family knew it was possible to survive as an artist. It wasn't out of the ordinary. Whereas Dalpat, I believe there was nobody in his family. He took it up as a young child. And I mean, this is Rajasthan, so people start working at 15 years old or whatever. They start learning these trades, and he's just done it all of his life, and he's amazingly good. When he makes a sketch for me, I'm sometimes just amazed what he can just pull out a piece of paper and go like this, like this, and I'm like, that was fast.
Have you ever tried to paint yourself?
Huh?
Have you ever tried miniature technique?
When I was young, no. When I was younger, I lived in the U.S. I did a lot of crazy stuff. I mean, I was doing these wild abstractions. I was spray painting. I was doing spray paintings and all this kind of stuff. I was actually doing hand-colored photography when I was younger. Okay, when I was in my 20s, but I had a dark room and I was making black and white prints, and I would color them with colored pencils. Very lightly with colored pencils, So I was really into all kinds of mediums and just playing around in my youth. It was more of a fun thing than anything that was too serious. But I always had this passion to make art of some, because my mother was an artist. So it was just, it was in me. But when I was young, yes, Jethro? What?
It'll always be fun and playful. I mean, it still is, right? You still got to keep the playing of it.
I love it.
Playful and serious simultaneously. Yeah.
Well, my normal day in Udaipur before this COVID crisis hit, I mean, I'd get up and I would go down by Shankar and Son's Rock and have a chai there. And, Shankar's wife would bring out the chai, and Shankar's a beedi smoker, so we'd always have a beedi and talk. And then this wonderful dog that jumps up in my lap, and, it's very family-like, And then they're very honest, open relationships. Like I tell them what I'm planning to do, and they would be showing me things they were working on for other people, even whatever, and then what they're doing for me. And then after that, it would be, let's just run by Rajesh at his shop. And Rajesh is generally doing something else on his own, but maybe we'd go and have a coffee together, by the lake. And then we'd go to Dalpat's Karkhana and sit there and have some more chai and another beedi and chat. And I mean, it's wonderful. For me, it's heaven.
I think that's the most, that's the great thing about working with Indian miniature painters, or through the Prince's School, we had a very diverse mix of people in every year group, and that's for me it's all about the different cultural connections and trying to understand cultures or religions that you're not necessarily that familiar with.
Right.
That's what I love most about it. The kind of communicating. I have a very good friend, Naveed Sadiq in Pakistan, and communicating with him about pigments and miniature painting, and and some of those miniature painters in Udaipur as well, Sanju. I don't know, maybe it's the same miniature painter, or he sometimes sends me brushes, and he was the person who first kind of inspired me in this miniature painting journeys. But it's those kind of relationships which sort of really make it such.
We need to come back and hang out, because that sounds fun, because we're kind of like monastic in our little studio. It's not the same community vibe in terms of just, you know, we just kind of go to our studio and paint and then hang out with people afterwards. But the process of painting at the moment anyway isn't that same kind of
having more of a dialogue with
now that we've left the schools.
More artists. Yeah.
Right. Well, you should come to Udaipur and visit me sometime.
Yeah, definitely.
The whole art gang, you know. It's a very good vibe here with all of us, actually. It's very nice. So anyway, I had more questions, and now my mind's going blank about what was next on the agenda. Well, since I can't remember, do you want to talk about your work a little more, or what's coming up in your exhibition world?
So, I mean, I had a show back in just before Christmas, and now I've just finished a painting. I was collaborating with my friend Orlando, who lives in California, and he's been making a piece of art. We were recording bird songs during lockdown because everyone could suddenly hear them, and it was beautiful. So he wrote a piano piece, and he wanted me to paint something. So
the painting is I Hear the Birds.
Pardon?
Yeah, that's the one.
On Facebook, I Hear the Birds.
Yeah. So that was a really nice project to work on during crazy times. And I've just started this. Well, I just finished this one, but I'm just basically moving through the colors. I've done the orange.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, is that incredible? That's an orangutan in the middle and tiger.
Yeah, I want to make a children's book of different collections of animals. I've done black and white animals together, and I want to just simply go through the colors. I've had this idea for ages, but I never thought it was strong enough, or it was going to take a long time to do. But then lockdown, I thought I could do that whilst we're in the house. So I just started it recently, and going to carry that on. I've been doing blossom trees in the background, and Lizzie's been doing a geometry painting.
So when you say you're doing a children's book, you're not doing an artist book, you're doing something you hope to publish or print in some way.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. I've never published a book before, but I think it'd be nice to do that. Yeah.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
And Lizzie, Elisabeth, what are you working on currently?
Well, I just recently, after having my first solo show at the end of last year, which was like thrilled that it managed to happen before all this COVID-19 business. I then was part of a small group show at Grosvenor Gallery called Aspects of Geometry, which recently closed, which had a few geometry paintings in. And then I've had a little bit of a break since then, but I've been like doing a lot of reading into yogic philosophy. Partially because like yoga has kept me sane during this lockdown period. I've been doing it every day, and I'm not sure how this is going to sort of influence my work, but I think it might play into it a little bit more in the future. We'll see.
Okay, so you both have things coming up.
What are you working on at the moment?
Oh God, we're working on a million projects at one time. We've got that whole series where we're painting on the old George Franklin Atkinson lithographs of curry and rice. And to me, that's the most exciting one that we're doing. So it's rather simple to do. We're not painting these huge jungle scenes, but we're just doing the figure on the lithograph. But it's quite interesting how we have to think about how do we insert him in a way that subverts it or harmonizes with it, or what's going to happen in the scene. And then working with Rakesh, there's always a little difficulty with getting proportions right. But what we've noticed is Atkinson never got his proportions right. I mean, we've both noticed this. It's like his proportions were all over the board, you know? So when you have somebody who didn't really do proper proportion in the first place, then you're trying to figure out how big you make an object within that. It becomes really quite project, because it's like, well, if I compare it to this, it looks right, but if I compare it to that, it's totally wrong. But then if you compare these two together, you realize, well, he's wrong too, because that's why we're having the difficulty.
Maybe don't worry, just put it any on size. Go really small or really big.
You know, normally my art is certainly not heavily political because I really don't like it to be. But, you know, we do have to relate to current events sometimes. And so we have recently done some that are actually with me with the mask and the idea of being isolated from nature because nature has turned against us, you know. And we have done issues about ecology in the past and about the natural environment because that's always a big part of our work. But now the natural environment is beginning to become a little more threatening in our miniatures, it seems, you know, rather than welcoming, rather than a paradisical, idyllic natural environment, which in the past has had intrusion of smokestacks or, you know, sewage pipes, you know, pumping sewage into lakes and things. We have done that kind of thing in the past, but now it's like the natural environment itself is becoming hostile in some way to the little figure, the fedora man. Mm-hmm. I don't know where it's going to go, and I don't know how long we're going to go with that direction. Because in my art, I really like to see things as being more on a human level of emotions and things rather than current events. You know, it's my own image. So
I feel like at the moment it sort of, I try not to really get involved in politics in my work in any way, but at the moment, because it's so sort of directly impacting all of our lives, it's hard to for it not to almost. I think there's definitely feels like there's more of a place for it than ever at the moment.
Right.
If you know what I mean.
Sometimes you just can't ignore what's going on anymore.
Yeah.
You have to relate to it. And, you know, that goes back to the whole idea of relevancy, you know.
Yeah.
So sometimes tradition has, I mean, the Singh sisters always did wonderful with that, making their contemporary miniatures very relevant to current events or politics or social issues in some way. But I would sort of hate to see the whole contemporary miniature scene go in that direction at the same time. Like when I put together the Luminously show at Gallery Arc in Baroda, I just picked artists whose works I liked, you know, and you know, I honestly liked all the work, and I thought it made a nice little progression as you went through the gallery. I knew nothing about the artist's politics or whatever. I could care less about that. And I know there were some really like sort of right-wing Brahmin type artists in that show, and there were certainly Marxists in that show and everything in between. And it's like, you know, to me that wasn't part of the criterion. The criterion was, what are they painting, how well are they painting it, and is it interesting enough to like, and does it fit with everything else in the show?
It's good that art can be that place, a platform where people from those extreme opposite ends come together.
So where do you think, like, what, I just want to keep this going a little longer. Where do you think the contemporary miniature scene, if you can even call it that, where do you think it's going? Where can it go? So many curators only identify it with Pakistan, which drives me crazy because so much goes on in India, but where do you think that direction might lead?
I don't know. Sorry. I
think there is a lot of exciting art though coming out of Pakistan, from NCA, and you know, lots of miniature painters doing sort of alternative things with it. And there are lots of interesting artists, I think, coming out of the Prince's School who are exploring miniature painting in different ways as well. It's hard to, so I definitely think there's like a resurgence right now of interest in tradition, in this kind of traditional painting, whether your focus be more like kind of Pakistani or Indian or Persian. Like I feel like there is a real like resurgence in it in general right now. But as to actually how it sort of kind of develops is really difficult to know, because I think,
Predict.
because people are doing such different things with it, whether they're doing more contemporary style miniatures inspired by the life we lead, or whether they're kind of making traditional painting more contemporary by changing it in different ways.
It's kind of an ironic thing that happens by like not actually trying to move too fast, as by trying to keep things fairly stationary. It suddenly looks different, and then therefore the contemporary world notices you because you're the pink
apple in the group. Well, I've really noticed, like, you know, the past years at the India Art Fair and Art Hong Kong, the last time I was at Art Hong Kong, when you see people walking around, the fascination, they've all seem to have sort of gotten bored and jaded a little bit with these very sleek kind of contemporary sculptures and things made out of plexiglass, stainless steel and all of that. It doesn't excite them. And what you see people really running up to are works that are very intricate, works that have a lot of detail, where the skill level is there. And that's really attracting the people to the wall. So I think there is a change going on. Which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, definitely.
I shared a studio for many years with my friend Jed Palmer, who's a sign writer, and he went from graphic design and doing a lot of computer work to actually, I think he was traveling around San Francisco, and he saw a guy painting an old, a sign using his hand and paint. He's like, wow, I want to do that. And so yeah, I mean, going back to the craft of it is popular now because again we're using our hands again.
Which is a very human thing, I think, using your hands, and perhaps as well because of all the technology that people are just, and I guess because the technology is useful because you get a quicker production of lots of things happening. But I think for us as humans, using your hands is really beneficial for us to connect to that humanness.
I think we're all so much more aware of our hands now just through COVID and constantly washing.
Yeah, that's true.
Cleaner. I've become very conscious of my hands suddenly, more conscious than usual. What they touch.
Yeah, and although COVID is devastating in many different ways, like it's definitely there are some positive aspects coming out of it, whether it's like smaller classroom. I hope some of these things continue in England. They've got sort of 15 children in a class instead of 30, or whether it's us really appreciating. In London at the moment, we have like very clear skies with very little pollution, and just appreciating some of those things.
Quiet things and cycle routes. Maybe they'll stay more permanently in some towns. And
I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one thing I love about Europe because it's so walkable. Most places are very walkable or bikeable.
Yeah.
Especially a place like Amsterdam or Paris, you can just bike so easily, the older cities at any rate.
Yeah, definitely.
So there was one other thing, which is what we forgot to mention at the symposium, and that is, so people like us come and we start making what we call contemporary miniatures. And maybe it's not people like us, but I always think like the first one was sort of Francesco Clemente, maybe. And then certainly there's been like this homegrown movement that came out of Lahore in Pakistan. But I meet old miniaturists here sometimes who really bemoan this, and they say, they're ruining the tradition. The tradition was Radha and Krishna. The tradition was Hanuman. There were certain religious iconography that miniaturists were to paint in certain manners with certain landscapes, and that now they're just kind of going wild and they're doing whatever they want. And that in and of itself, you might be preserving the techniques, but you're not preserving really the tradition. What do you feel about that, and how important is that? I don't know.
I think it's definitely really important to keep these kinds of dialogues with people who feel like that going, because obviously their views on it really matter. But at the same time, I think traditions do always they evolve and they change, and in some ways, I think it sort of renews interest in this style of painting. I definitely feel like, I don't know, many friends that I have like become interested in miniature painting because, you know, it's what Jethro and I do. So I think that can also lead to like more kind of awareness of other, like Hinduism, and maybe a little bit more understanding about different religious beliefs, which I feel in the world we live in today is of paramount importance, understanding and respecting other cultures. And as an artist, I think you're always on this kind of tightrope balance of, you have got to be kind of very conscious and careful in the whole cultural appropriation. But at the same time, I think in order to be an artist or a writer, part of it is looking at other things and working with them and kind of mixing things together in your work. That's kind of part of creativity. But it's about doing it in a kind of educated and conscious way, I suppose.
Well, I think the paintings that are traditional in the aspect of subject matter, they're always going to find a market. There's always going to be buyers for those. As long as there are Hindus around, there's going to be buyers for those traditional paintings. And I don't see that what people like we do, or the Singh sisters or Sarah Wasim or whoever, I don't see that's really threatening that in any way. I think it might make people jealous though, because the contemporary ones tend to get higher prices, but not always. And that's the way I look at it.
And that's a difficult thing, because I feel like that's something that's a little bit out of my sort of control, if you know what I mean. The contemporary art market is a bit of a crazy world thing. And it ascribes value in strange ways. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's two different things going on. I mean, I really want. I mean, the whole thing that drew me to it was the fact things hadn't changed. And I would hate it if I had a contributing factor to it changing. But I'd want to open dialogue with those people, and I want people like that to talk to me. And
really, I suppose, like, our interest in it is like from a real love of it. It's kind of is things made out of love, really, an interest and a love of it.
Because you have to make work which is pertinent to you and your times, but I also want to stay true to certain principles, that are timeless and things that have endured throughout time. And when I first saw certain miniatures, not all of them, but there's certain ones in the V&A and that when we went to India, and just felt like pure joy looking at this, and I felt connected to it. And
right.
Ramahasha, where the hairs on my skin have become happy. I just like the poetic translation of it, and that's how I felt. And I didn't feel the same thing looking at the Western miniatures so much. I do love some of them. There's who was a guy that I liked, but it just kind of like I felt connected to it, and I wanted to do it, and I want to meet people through doing it as well.
And in a way, you can't beat the Indian miniature painters with depictions of Radha and Krishna, because the philosophy and the Bhagavad Gita and everything behind it is so wonderful and strong in terms of storytelling and having higher ideals and principles to live your life by. And I feel like, in a sense, contemporary miniature painting can never meet the ancient Indian paintings in quite the same sort of way.
Right, of course.
There's different things. There's the sacred art, and then there's the other miniature art. Like lots of Mughal art was syncretic in nature, and Mughals painting hunting scenes, I don't think can be deemed sacred. I mean, that's what they were painting to glorify themselves. I mean, and
we're painting landscapes, but with a very different approach than you.
Yeah.
All of this abundance give us.
Yeah, more, I suppose, that's kind of more documentary painting, isn't it? It's capturing a time in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's two different things going on.
Glorifying the royalty, glorifying the Maharana or the Maharaja generally, or the hunting scene.
But it's weird because when, like, the ethos of the Princess School is you're doing this craft as a dissolution of your ego. Like you're doing the craft to, like, forget about expressing yourself, whereas the contemporary art world is, you know, all in reverse. But it's kind of but then it's like, well, what the hell is the self? I mean, the self is just what your inputs have been up to this point, and it happens to be that my inputs, well, that's why I like painting nature, because nature's been there and it will be there when I'm gone. So, but also in timelessness to nature, but also my personal input in my life is that I have been to India, and I did learn miniature painting to understand it more thoroughly and deeply, and I look at the symbolism, and I've established relations, and so it's now part of my life, and I feel like I'm getting quite good at it. I mean, like,
you are obviously. You are obviously.
But I mean, I love it, and these techniques I've learned, I want to carry on, and but at the same time, if someone came up to me and said, "Look, this is not your territory," I would want to listen to that, and I'd want to have a conversation with that person. I mean, you know, there's other areas in the world of culture where it's very pertinent right now, what's going on, but where it's obvious, like, you know, Native Americans in America saying, look, you can't just put a headdress on when you don't understand the cultural significance, the fact that it's an elder wears it, you know, a place of respect, and you're just wearing it as a fancy costume, then that's not cool.
That's where Rakesh is so important to me, our BJ, because he's very religious. Rakesh is very religious, unlike me, and I'm very secular, you know. And so Rakesh is the one who's like, you want to use Garuda? Why? You know, like he quizzes me a little bit, you know, and he checks me. He's sort of like, why are we doing this? You know. So I mean, that's where the partnership really helps. Oh, that was a question I had for you. Have you ever considered working together as a team in an art project?
We have done.
We've talked about it. We've talked about it a lot, but we've never actually started it.
Well, I mean, we work together. We're always looking at each other's work and, you know, commenting on it and asking each other what we think. But in terms of working on the exact same paint, I mean, we worked on a mural in Italy once, and it was a baptism of fire, like when we just started going out with each other. And the creative experience, you know, can be like that anyway. When there's two people, it's kind of like
yeah, early days of our relationship, and disputes over colours
and why is that going there, and then getting angry with each other. I think it looked quite good what we did in the end, but it was quite stressful.
Yeah, there's nothing that destroys a relationship faster than working together sometimes. You know, really.
Yeah,
but
so
some people do. I knew these two photographers back in Wisconsin, where I'm from, John Shim and Julie Lindemann. They photographed together since they were like 16 years old, and they became very famous in the US and especially in the Midwest as photographers who used antiquarian processes. And it was always John Shim and Julie Lindemann, and they were inseparable. They did everything together. Everything they did together, you know? It's like Tommy and I look at each other and say, God, I could never live like that. But we love them both, you know?
Yeah, it's a funny thing, because I think like when we were last year, when we were both preparing for these solo shows at the same time, although like domestically it was quite difficult with paintings stacked up on our kitchen table and things like that.
To eat.
From a creative point of view, it was fantastic, because we were so both involved in our work but able to understand the late nights and talk about it. So it has its definite pros and cons.
But we were wondering whether we should even do this together, because we don't want it to become just Lizzie and Jethro all the time.
Yeah. Well, I actually expected you to appear on separate screens. I was kind of
maybe we should have done
together.
We might have got quite where to learn.
Do you know Manish Soni and Bhilwara? Manish Soni, do you know him at all?
I don't know him.
Yeah, no. Paul Abraham has collected a lot of his work, and he did. It's a funny story, actually, because I met, this goes back to that whole thing about tradition and appropriation, but Rakesh and I went to see Manish many, many, many years ago. I mean, like 10 years ago or something. And he was known, and he still is known as an extraordinary miniaturist in Bhilwara. And we asked if he wanted to collaborate with us at all and do whatever. And we showed him some things we had, some of our miniatures we had done. And he looked and said, no, never said no. No, this is not miniature painting. This is not miniature painting. He was very, very critical, very skeptical. And because he was really into the Radha Krishna, very traditional subject matter thing. And so then he finally said to me, he said, well, if you want me to help on something, but I'll never put my name to it. And he never mentioned my name like that. So, I mean, he was that adamant about it. So it's like, okay, well, the time went by. All of a sudden, he called me up one day and he said, oh, Wazo, I'm doing a lot of stuff now. Now I'm like, addressing gender issues and blah, blah, blah. And he rattled off all these. And I was like, are you totally fucking with me or what are you doing here? But anyway, then he ended up doing that beautiful series on the life of Jesus for Paul Abraham.
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, I do know, yeah.
You know who I did that exquisite series for Paul Abraham.
Yeah, right.
So so everybody changes, but maybe that wasn't such a change for him because maybe he still considered it very traditional in his approach or definition of traditional.
Yeah. I often I'm quite reluctant to do interviews and stuff because I listen to things I've said in the past. I just cringe. I mean, but then everyone changes and our opinions change, and
right.
And get on with it, really.
I understand. I grew up in the American Midwest. I understand that cringe very well. So anyway, I think it was very nice talking to you. I think we've probably run pretty long. And maybe we should wrap it up unless you have anything else to say.
No, other than thanks for calling us, and hopefully come to Udaipur and hang out.
Yeah, please do. It would be great. Take you to the rooftop, have a gin and tonic if you drink.
Nice.
Yeah, that sounds great.
I doubt that you smoke beaties, but you can come and join us, okay?
Yeah.
Get all the artists. We'll have an artist party.
Nice.
Yeah, that was great.
Okay, Jethro, Buck, Lizzie Deane, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hello in Udaipur. Goodbye. Say goodbye.
Bye now. Goodbye.
Bye,
See ya.